the trick to drawing controlled lines is that you're always rotating your pencil to keep that point sharp. And when you draw a line for an extended period of time, the way to do that is a gentle little twist with your arm. You also want to keep your pencil parallel to the parallel rule. You don't want it leaning forward or leaning in too much. You want to kind of keep it parallel. And as you lay your line, as you go from left to right, if you're right-handed, you're gently twisting your line, right? And you keep it in that same track, and you wind up with a nice tapered point throughout all your lines. If you practice drawing those lines, you'll get the hang of that. You'll get the feel of drawing a line. Some people can grab it closer down to the knurled edge to get a control of that. I am a little bit back further on the pencil, but whatever works for you. But the key is, for a uniform line, is to keep that angle consistent, keep it parallel to your edge, and keep it twisted. Some common mistakes that drafters make in the quality of their lines is they'll start from one end, and instead of keeping that consistent angle from the beginning to the end of the line, they'll do this, where they'll just start it here, and then they'll just kind of grind it like that, so that by the end of the line, your line is completely blunt, and you've like ruined your point. You have no control of your line quality anymore. After a few correcting lines, where you go back into drawing it with a uniform angle, you can get that nice tapered pointed edge back again without sharpening it. But be careful not to do that method. It might come natural to you, but you have to almost move your body as you draw your lines. The other thing to avoid is the tendency to not stay consistently parallel to your parallel rule. Like if you do something like this, and then you kind of go up, and you go in, and you go up, your line is no longer straight. There's that much play in where you draw your line against your parallel rule that you can be off by quite a distance in a uniform line. And at a very small scale, say you're drawing something at 1/16th scale, which we'll talk about later, you could be off by almost 1.5 feet. That's no good. So control your line work. We'll practice with that. As we can begin to draw, actually make a line on paper, make a series of lines that lead us into understanding how we can develop our lettering and how we can control our line work. I'll start off with an exercise just understanding the difference between line weights. A series of lines in 2H grade lead and a series of lines in F grade lead. So you begin to feel the difference of lead weights. We'll start with a series of lines on the left-hand side of 2H leads, a series of lines on the right-hand side with F leads, which are softer. So with the same hand weight, you should produce lighter lines on the left side than you will on the right side, because the left side is the harder 2H lines and the right side is the softer F lines. So we'll set up an exercise like that, and we'll start by making sure we have our 2H leads, and we'll take the lead out of there, put it into our 2H lead holder by clamping down, depressing the clinch, sliding in the 2H lead. Now this is a factory point, not so great for drafting. We want to control that. So we'll sharpen it using our lead pointer. And remember, the lead pointer has one hole for sharp drafting points and another hole for the blunt lettering points. We want a sharp drafting point. So we drop our lead into that hole, get the bottom, clinch it down to there. That's the size it should be. Put it into the barrel, grasp the bottom, grind it until we feel like it's sharpened. That's made the change there. Now, you want to get rid of all that excess graphite. Blow it. Wipe it off on a little tissue. Get all that excess off. Now it's really sharp. We have to temper that point. So we'll temper that. Grind it down. Now we're set to go with 2H. So we'll set up our 8.5 by 11 inch sheet of our design vellum, or you can cut it down from your roll. Pre-cut size is good. We'll go horizontal landscape view. Line it up. The bottom lines up with the parallel rule. We'll get our corners done with our drafting dots. Two more drafting dots. Pull the back. Out comes the one. Pull the back. Out comes the other. Do the corners. Tape that down. Okay, now we want to treat this like a little drawing sheet. So we'll make a border. We'll make a 1/2 inch border all around. So we'll take our architect scale and we'll measure, try to always be perpendicular. We'll measure 1/2 inch border all around. So here's a 1/2 inch down here, make a tick. You don't even have to move it, 1/2 inch up there from 8 to 8.5, another tick. We'll do it for the vertical lines too, the left border and the right border. 1/2 inch, make a tick. Make another tick, a 1/2 inch there. Now we've got our ticks to give us our border. We're going to draw our lines. Always start out with light lines, just layout lines. So there's the tick. We line up, point with that, and draw a light line as a guideline as to what the frame will be, our border. We've got the sides. Now we're going to die in the horizontal lines with our parallel rule. Lift it up. Bring it right into space. It's okay for the layout lines to be light and intersect with the other lines. We'll find our point right here. Take that. These are all layouts, so it's not critical yet, but now we've got the border. And we have a little bit of intersection so we can kind of see where we are. And we want to lay out our series of lines on the left, series of lines on the right, so we'll block it out. We'll give ourselves a nice margin. So let's see, we now have 10 inches left. If we have 3-inch lines, say, 3-inch lines, or 3.5-inch lines, we'll have an inch space in between. So let's go an inch in, and 3.5 to 4.5. And then another inch to 5.5, another 3.5 inches to 9. Now we've kind of marked off our series of lines, a block where we can put our lines. So we can now make our layout lines again, just to figure out where the area will be that we'll be making our practice lines. Again, these are very light, a light hand with a 2H pencil. They hardly read, but it lets you know where you're going to make your lines. Make sure I got all my stuff off. So now we'll make our lines from here to here, and I think a good spacing for these lines should be every 1/4 of an inch, because you'll see we'll use these lines for lettering exercises later. But first I want you to get comfortable understanding how the lines look at different grades. So we have about 7.5 inches left. Since we have an inch border around, we can have an inch border at the top and an inch border at the bottom. If you want to leave another 1/2 inch so we can have a title strip down below, we'll leave that for title strip, and then another inch. So our block of lines will be 5 inches by 3.5 inches, which seems about okay. So that extra 1/2 inch was made so we can make a little title strip at the bottom. We can call it our little drafting exercise. We can have a little bit heavier line. We can begin to get a little bit more of our line weights here. I'll make layout lines again, just so we can describe where we're drawing. Again, they're light. So I've ticked it off. Here's the top for the 2H lines. Here's the top of the F lines. Here's the bottom of the 2H lines, and here's the bottom of the F lines. So a rough outline of about what this drawing will look like, be your 8.5 by 11 in landscape view, a block of 2H drafted lines, and a block of F drafted lines. First, we'll start with all the lines top to bottom in 2H. Now, I want them evenly spaced, so I'm going to space them every 1/4 of an inch. After I've done that, I'm going to change my lead out or use my second lead holder and make the same thing on the right-hand side with F lines. So you can feel the difference between 2H and F. So I want to measure off where all these lines are going to be. I have to tick out every 1/4 of an inch. So a couple ways to do that is with your architect scale. You can use the regular ruler part, the 1/16 of an inch. Every 4 ticks is a 1/4 of an inch, but there's a lot of lines for you to see, and you can see the difference. Like here's a 1/4 inch, that's a 1/2 an inch, that's 3/4 and 1, and so forth. Or you could go to the 1/4 inch scale, and then they're ticked off every 1/4 of an inch. So if you wanted to do that, we haven't discussed scale, but you can see where these ticks are. You know, 44 to 43 to 42, that's a 1/4 of an inch. So I'll measure each one of those, and it's always more accurate to keep your scale stationary and then tick off from there. So if I can keep my scale lined up with my guideline, I shall tick off every 1/4 of an inch, meaning every other line, because these are 1/8 inch lines on one side and 1/4 inch lines on the other side. So 44, 43, 42, and so forth, up to 24 will give me all my 1/4 inch spacing. So that's what I'll do. I'll start ticking them off here, and that will be my spacing for all my lines. So we go 40, and since I'm right-handed, I'm starting at the left-hand side. I'll put my tick marks on the left-hand side so I can start, know where I'm measuring, and then measure and then draw my line. So I'll start practicing getting nice quality line. That same measurement will then be used for my F lines because I can use that to measure. So I measure once and use it twice. So now I'm set up to do my 2H lines. This is a practice for you to feel how to control a line with your drafting. So the trick is, again, get comfortable making sure you start the line. You can have a little emphasis on the start, and then kind of even weight, even incline, a little bit of a twist to keep your line work going, and just feel what a normal weight produces with the line. And you just move down from line to line. Enough weight for the line to appear dark, enough sharpness for the line to be sharp. You want it to read. You don't want it to grind down too much, but you want to leave a nice impression. And you want to keep it starting and stopping at the right spot. At the beginning, at the end, you can always give it a special little weight and then drag that along and make sure that it stays sharp. You don't want your pencil line to degrade. You don't want it to get fuzzy. And now you kind of come down, and there's a row of 2H lines. I didn't do the last, that's a layout line. You can almost see the difference between the layout line and the drafted line. I will draft over that with a 2H as a committed line. And now you see they're all 2H lines. So now I'm going to go and do that same exercise over with F. You're going to feel the difference between the softness of the F and the feel of the 2H. So now you're going to do the same thing we did. We don't have to measure the lines again because these lines are already measured here. We're just going to project them off. So here's the point, and then we transfer it to the F line. And the same weight, we're going to feel the difference between 2H and F. F is a little bit more delicate, and yet it should be blacker. The challenge with a softer lead is it tends to grind down more. You have to be a little bit more careful. We have our series of F lines. Now, it may be hard to tell at a at an immediate glance, but this is a little bit blacker. Seems pretty close, but the more you start to look at the line weight variations, the more you'll appreciate the subtle differences between harder lines and softer lines. Now, like sign painters, to keep your drawing neat, I'll just rest my hand on this example and just practice writing my alphabet in here. So in this case, at 1/4 inch, I'll be using, say, like an F lead to do with lettering. That's a nice lead weight. The lettering guidelines are always lighter. They won't normally be as dark as this, but we'll use this just since we have that drawn already. We will practice an alphabet where we're stroking the letters in a more natural phase. We hit the top line and the bottom line, and you keep consistent height that way. We try to keep consistent with our intermediates, and just practice your lettering so you have a nice, consistent style. So we'll start with the alphabet, resting our hand on here so we don't smudge all the rest behind it. We'll start with the first two, and you're just basically getting the top and bringing it down to the bottom. That's A. And top to the bottom. You have a little bit of an emphasis on the beginning, a little bit of emphasis on the end. You just want to make sure you hit it so you have relatively very consistent size and proportion letters. And you go through your alphabet A, B, C, D. You can always adjust some of that look. You can have a tail like that. You can keep practicing. You don't have any serifs. There's no like tops and bottoms. They're just very straight. It's a direct alphabet, and it's very clear to read. You'll see lots of different types. I bring my M's down to the bottom. Some people do their O's in two separate sections, like this and like that, to make an O. So I'll have to pick up the rest. You always skip a line between lines of lettering. So in the second line, you always have a space between that. We'll pick up Q, R, if I remember the alphabet correctly, S, T. And in each letter, you kind of have a gentle twist. So you always have a fresh edge. U, V, W goes up to the top as well, like the M comes down to the bottom, but they're like that. And you know, you try to keep it even, X, Y, and Z. So you're making them very dark. The letters are certainly supposed to be darker than the layout lines that define them. In our case, our layout lines are a little bit darker, but when you do lettering exclusively, your layout lines will be very light. I mean, you'll see them, but they'll be very light. They won't compete with the letters. The letters are always way darker than the lines. And then you want to do your numbers too. You know, starting with, you can start with 0, 0, 1, 2, lots of different ways to do 3s, lots of different ways to do 4s. I tend to like to have them closed, 5s, 6s. You know, you like to get that nice little shape to them, 7s, 8s. Try to keep a symmetry, 9, and back to 0 again. Those are your letters. They make them nice and easy to read. So you want to try to gather that habit where you're lettering, and you can make it specific. There are like some people you'll see, we don't have the Ames lettering guide here, but some people use the Ames lettering guide to establish a third line, which is your ascenders and descenders. Like some people will make A's kind of do like that, and like that, like that. You know, you'll see that kind of crazy lettering too, which is fine for you to develop, but I think it's always good to start. You don't want to go back slanting too much. You want your verticals to be pretty much vertical, and then your horizontals can be off a little bit like that. Sometimes you see that. So there are numbers of different kinds, but let's start with this kind of an alphabet to get the. go through this exercise and write your alphabet and numbers as often as you can. Fill out both pages and keep practicing that until you get a nice lettering style.